Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and we're continuing on to week 123. Romania is on the ropes. Reflections on the Battle of the Somme. Now, before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay. Yeah. Really got nothing else to add here. Got nothing to add here at the beginning. Let's fucking dive in. Reflections on the Battle of the Somme. What could that mean? Are we reflecting, or are the generals of the time reflecting? Because they got to do a lot of reflections to not be stupid. They're very stupid. Let's go ahead.
What do you do if you're a neutral nation surrounded by war and some of the friendly warring nations want to transport troops through your capital city? Well, if you're Greece, you fight back.
They didn't really fight back, though. It kind of... I mean, I guess they kind of... They had protests. Didn't go so well for them.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph died and his grandnephew Karl ascended to the throne. There were also political appointments in Russia and Germany. Central Powers forces took Craiova, capital of Western Wallachia, much to Romanian dismay, while other Central Powers forces were crossing the Danube to the south. Even further south in the Balkans, the Allies took Monastir, but were not strong enough to advance much further. And the huge news from the Western Front was the end of the Battle of the Somme. I'd like to begin this week with some reflections about that enormous battle. At the Somme, the British had had both air and artillery superiority. Their aircraft were, for the most part, free to direct artillery fire and take photos of defenses. But these advantages were often negated. One huge factor was the weather. Even at the height of the summer, there was so much cloud and rain that often, for days on end, planes could not be deployed. Artillery accuracy was also not quite advanced enough that spotting...
Sir, I don't think you're wearing your helmet properly. Why? What does this do?
could be used effectively. Adjusting the range of the heavy guns took a long time, which reduced the number of shells that could be fired. Still, British commander Sir Douglas Haig's guns fired 19 million shells during the battle, which is just under 150,000 shells per day. But since it was the British who were on the attack, the gunners were required to take out small targets, trenches or machine gun posts that are difficult to hit. The Germans had the relative luxury of firing into the general areas where British and French were forming for attacks or moving into no man's land. So the British superiority in artillery often didn't translate to success in the field. The British also often got themselves into positions where the Germans could do maximum damage with fewer weapons. The right angle around Delville Wood in July and August, the northern flank on July 1st, there are many other examples of the British exposing themselves to intense enemy artillery. Much has been written about the supposed inferiority of the British infantry. However, Robin Pryor and Trevor Wilson in The Somme write, "The British infantry, when they were adequately supported by firepower, the factor that was the determinant of victory on the Western Front, could perform as well as their enemy. Whatever failings the Somme demonstrated in the British Army, it is hard to argue that the performance of the combat infantry was one of them."
No, it's typically the leadership that causes the losses. It's really never the infantry themselves. It's usually the leadership. Yeah.
If you want to know what those two thought of the high command at the Somme, they thought pretty little of Hugh Gough, that his dithering was disastrous for his troops, and that his performance at the Somme should have seen him sink into a well-deserved obscurity. They found,
As with pretty much every single fucking general in this war. Except for really the German ones. And the Russians. I think the Russians are actually, the Russian generals, with what they have available, I feel like they're doing, with the circumstances the Russians find themselves in, I think they're doing all right. The French and British and Italians and Austro-Hungarians, though, and Ottomans. What the fuck? Literal dumbasses.
Find Sir Henry Rawlinson more of an enigma. He had been one of the originators of the bite and hold tactics in 1915, and a couple of times at the Somme tried to go back to that style of attack. His plans were far more realistic than Haig's, but whenever he was challenged, he ended up attempting the grandiose designs of Haig's mind, usually with disastrous results.
Why?
But most of all, they think that Rawlinson didn't have any fixity of purpose, that he would see a course of action that he thought very sensible and well thought out, and then proceed in a completely different direction. Of course, it was Haig who had control. Haig who set the battle's parameters July 1st. Haig who directed where resources went, when and where attacks would happen, and what the objectives were. Haig claimed he achieved 3 things at the Somme. He relieved the pressure on the French at Verdun, he pinned the German army to the Western Front, which relieved pressure on the Russians, and he began the process whereby the German army would be worn out by one continuous battle over the next couple of years. Do these stand up? Pryor and Wilson say no. Haig planned the Somme without thinking about Verdun. The Somme did eventually focus German attention away from Verdun, but that had not been part of Haig's intention. Did he pin the Germans to the Western Front? No, he didn't. 15 German divisions left the Western Front during the Battle of the Somme, and they were now overrunning Romania. As for the continuous battle, how many times over the past few months have we seen Haig launch a new offensive that was designed to be the great breakthrough? Haig had always believed in the decisive battle, and it wasn't until the Somme was nearly over that he was talking about a campaign in 1917. He did adopt modern weapons like the tank and the airplane, but he still thought cavalry would carry the day in the end. And if you look at his search for the big breakthrough, you see that he was the opposite of an attritional general, and that far from having too little imagination, he had too much, dreaming of cavalry charges and Napoleonic victory. You can also blame the civilian British War Committee, for it was they who provided the horses, guns, and shells. They were worried, straight from the start, about the casualties and the lack of progress, and by September, they could no longer pretend that they were getting anywhere or tying down the Germans. In October, Haig asked them for permission to continue the offensive. This at a time when they were worried about the effect the drain of manpower would have on Britain's ability to continue the war. But in a total loss of nerve, they did not even discuss his request. The Somme writes, "The battle ran its muddy, bloody, and inconclusive course. The civilian leadership therefore failed the men for whom they claimed to be trustees. The soldiers who became casualties in their hundreds of thousands fought well in a good cause, but they deserved a plan and competent leadership as well as a cause." But everybody thought their cause was just, including the German forces now invading Romania, hoping to take the vast Romanian reserves of oil and grain. We've talked before about General Erich von Falkenhayn and Field Marshal August von Mackensen's
I just want to say it again. I didn't say it last week. I love this fucking map. I love the progress that they've made in visualizing these fronts, right? Because before it was very static lines, and you couldn't really tell exactly how far like the Germans or French or British had pushed. But now they've really, they're doing it. They're doing it. You can easily see it here with the lines and stuff.
Central Powers forces. But what of the third German force in the north along the upper Alt Valley in the Turnu-Rosu Pass region? Well, they had moved quite slowly through the mountains, encountering nightmarish logistical problems. But on the 25th, General Konrad Kraft von Delmensingen reported that the resistance before him was broken. His divisions were now heading towards Pitesti and Campulung, which they took the 29th. Also in the north, General Alexandru Averescu's Romanian Second Army had been preventing the Germans from heading south from Brașov since mid-October. But he was now withdrawing. The whole northern half of the Romanian front had been ruptured. The the Romanians now faced 3 columns converging on Bucharest. General Constantin Prizan was put in charge of its defense. His plan was to crush the enemy forces one at a time before they could unite in overwhelming numbers. Mackensen's forces coming from the south were both the nearest and the smallest of those 3 columns. But on the 27th and 28th, his German and Bulgarian forces had entered Gheorghevu on the Danube, which had a railway that ran directly to Bucharest. Soon, Mackensen had complete control of the Danube. However, on the 1st, at the end of the week, the Battle of the Argus River began as the Romanians attacked Mackensen's flank. This was Prizan's hammer. That same day, the Germans captured 2 Romanian officers who had the plans for the defense of the capital on them, and Falkenhayn realized that Mackensen was in growing danger. And one place that
spicy.
that had seen danger growing all autumn was Greece. Greece was pretty much split in 2 by this time. Last week, the Venizelos, supporters of Eleftherios Venizelos, had declared war on Germany and Bulgaria. So now, on the 30th...
What is with this man's eyes? Like... Look at that. Look at that. Look at that's fucking weird. Y'all follow a man that looks like that? Disgusting.
Now, on the 30th, 3,000 British, French, and Italian troops landed at the Piraeus and marched to Athens. But they were attacked by King Constantine's royalist forces. He had refused the Allies permission to supply the Salonika front from Athens. The Allied forces withdrew after a few hours of scattered fighting. And the skies over Britain saw action as 2 out of 7 raiding Zeppelins were shot down. And on the 28th came the first daytime Gotha bomber raid on London. 10 were injured. And so the week ends with 3 columns made up of all 4 central powers converging on Bucharest as the Romanian defense of the capital kicks into gear. The other European fronts were fairly quiet, but in Greece there was ever-increasing turmoil, which you could see coming. The country was split, but was still neutral. At least the royalist side was neutral. But the Allies had landed hundreds of thousands of men on Greek territory and had even taken control of the press and the police. Now they wanted to use the capital to transport troops. The action there this week was pretty small, sure, but ominous and foreboding. Would the Allies just give up trying? Would Greece give up fighting back? Maybe neutral is no longer possible in this modern war.
Unless you're Switzerland. And, well, actually give money to both sides.
If you want to learn more about the fascinating and complicated history of Greece during the First World War, you can click right here to watch.
And that was Romania on the Ropes, Reflections on the Battle of the Somme, the Great War, week 123. This was a pretty good episode. It was pretty good. Not amazing, not spectacular. Just more of the same. I liked Indy's reflections on the Battle of the Somme, though. That was well spoken. So yeah, really got nothing else to add here at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.